What would you do if your husband arrived at your funeral with his mistress on his arm? In a chapel filled with white lilies and 300 grieving guests, Eleanor Hartwell's memorial becomes something far, far darker than a farewell. Because 6 weeks before her death, Eleanor uncovered not only an affair, but a terrifying truth. The man she married was living under a dead man's name, and she was already building the trap that would destroy him. What begins as a funeral becomes a posthumous prosecution, where every document she prepared becomes one more nail in the coffin of the thought her death would set him free.
How would you react if your husband arrived at your funeral with his lover? 300 people stared in disbelief as Marcus Bennett entered his pregnant wife's memorial, a new woman on his arm. She was dressed in a shocking bright red. His wife, Eleanor, had only just been placed in her casket, but there was a secret that no one in that room knew. Eleanor had learned of the affair 6 weeks before she passed away. While investigating her unfaithful husband, she found something far more chilling than a simple affair. The man she had married was an imposter. His name was not Marcus Bennett, and the real man with that name had been gone for 8 years. Eleanor knew she would not get out of her marriage alive, so she used her last weeks to set a trap that would ruin him after she was gone. When her will was read by the lawyer, all his secrets were exposed. The DNA evidence, the false identity, and the murder no one suspected. This is the tale of a woman who would not be silenced, even by death. Please listen to the very end of this story. I can promise you the revenge she orchestrated will leave you absolutely stunned. When the woman in red entered with 300 mourners held their breath, the first sound was a champagne glass shattering after slipping from someone's hand. That crash on the marble floor of Westbrook Memorial Chapel sounded like a gunshot. Nobody moved to clean up the broken glass. Nobody could even move. Catherine Hartwell was frozen, her empty hands still shaped as if holding the glass. She stared at the chapel entrance where her son-in-law had just appeared. Her daughter's husband, who was supposed to be overcome with sadness, was not by himself. White lilies were everywhere, filling the chapel. Their heavy scent was both sweet and overwhelming. It was the smell of death, trying to look beautiful. Flowers worth thousands of dollars surrounded a polished mahogany coffin. Pictures of a lovely woman with a cat and a warm smile were displayed on the walls. There was Eleanor at her college graduation, Eleanor on her wedding day, and Eleanor holding up a pregnancy test with joyful tears on her face. Eleanor Hartwell was 32 years old and 8 months pregnant at her time of death, and her husband had just entered her funeral with his mistress. Marcus Bennett stood there as if he were attending a party, not a memorial service. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled. His expensive black suit was worth more than a monthly salary for most people. His jaw was cleanly shaven, and he carried himself with total confidence. The woman beside him was young, perhaps 28, and stunningly beautiful, and she was in a red dress. It was not a dark red or a shade of crimson. It was a bright, shocking red, the color of blood on white snow, the color of passion in a place of deep sorrow. It showed a level of disrespect that felt like an attack. The whispers started instantly, moving through the crowd like a spreading fire. That is his mistress at his wife's funeral. Eleanor is barely gone. How could he do this? How could he bring her to this place? Richard Hartwell stood motionless by his daughter's coffin. He was a 62-year-old billionaire who built his fortune himself. He started with one property and grew it into Hartwell Properties, a huge real estate company on the East Coast. He had overcome hostile business deals that would have ruined other men. He had survived financial crises that made his rivals go bankrupt. He had suffered personal losses that would have broken anyone. Nothing had ever defeated Richard Hartwell, but this moment did. His security team started to walk toward Marcus. 3 large men were ready to remove him. Richard simply raised a hand without looking back. His men stopped immediately. His face showed a look of controlled pain. It was an expression that took great effort to hold. His entire body was tense. All his feelings were hidden behind a wall of sheer will. Only his eyes gave him away. They burned with a fire that was more than just anger or sadness. In the third row, Samantha Rhodes held the wooden bench so tightly her knuckles were white. Sam was 32, the same age as Eleanor, They were best friends from college, roommates, and had been in each other's weddings. They were the kind of friends who shared every secret. Sam knew what was happening. Eleanor explained everything during her last weeks, so Sam knew what was about to unfold. She saw Marcus lead Vanessa up the main aisle as if they were at a fancy party. He nodded to people he knew. He gave small, sad smiles to those who had known Eleanor for years. He acted like a grieving husband with the talent of a professional actor. They took seats in the front row, which was saved for the close family. Vanessa crossed her legs, and her red high-heeled shoe bounced a little. She looked around with obvious boredom, as if she was just waiting for it to be over. Jonathan Hartwell came from a side aisle. At 35, he was Eleanor's older brother. He had his father's strength and his mother's quick temper. Right now, he was extremely angry. "You have to get out," Jonathan said, his voice quiet but sharp. "Right now." Marcus looked up, pretending to be deeply offended that someone would speak to him that way. "I am Eleanor's husband. I am not leaving. That woman does not belong here. This is for family. This woman is my guest," Marcus said loud enough for others to hear. "I need you to respect my sorrow. I have just lost my wife and our unborn child. This is the most difficult day of my life." The unbelievable nerve of his words felt like a punch to Jonathan. His hands tightened into fists. He wanted to grab Marcus by his expensive suit and throw him out of the chapel. He wanted to wipe that smug look from his face and make him pay for this final insult to Eleanor. But his mother's voice stopped his angry thoughts. "Jonathan, do not do it here." Catherine Hartwell had moved across the room quietly. Her face was pale and her eyes were swollen from crying, but her voice was strong. "We will not cause a disturbance at my daughter's funeral. That is what he hopes for. We will not allow it." Jonathan looked from his mother to Marcus, then to Vanessa in her awful red dress. He took a step back. The air was still very tense, but the immediate conflict was over. The service started. Pastor Williams, who had known Eleanor her whole life, stood at the front. His voice shook as he spoke words that seemed empty compared to the situation. He spoke of Eleanor's kindness, her 10 years of volunteering at the children's hospital. He mentioned the student scholarships she paid for secretly. He talked about how she treated everyone at her father's company with equal respect. He mentioned her generosity, like the donations that kept the local animal shelter open. He talked about the money she gave to employees with health problems. He mentioned the time she spent on causes that were never in the news. He spoke of her excitement for her unborn baby, the nursery she decorated herself, and the names she had already chosen. He said her death was a terrible tragedy. He had no idea how right he was. Marcus was the one to give the eulogy. He walked to the podium slowly, trying to look sad with every step. He held the sides of the wooden stand, and his wedding band reflected the light. His eyes were moist with tears that seemed almost genuine. "Eleanor was my whole world," he started, his voice cracking at just the right times. "When I first saw her at a charity event 5 years ago, I knew she was incredible. She had a special light and warmth. She made you feel important." He stopped, dabbing at his eyes with an expensive handkerchief. "She was my partner, my closest friend, the reason I woke up in the morning. When she told me she was pregnant, I cried because she would have been a wonderful mother. I knew our daughter was going to be the most fortunate child alive." In the third row, Sam Rhodes observed his act. She saw the practiced sadness and the perfectly timed tears that came and went. She knew the real story. She knew Marcus was not happy when Eleanor shared the pregnancy news. He had turned pale and asked if she was certain. He said it was bad timing, and Sam knew his presence at that charity auction was no coincidence. For months, he meticulously researched Eleanor, learning her routines, desires, and breaking points. She knew exactly what Eleanor had found in her last days, and she understood the plan that was set in motion. But Eleanor Hartwell had known about Vanessa for 6 weeks before she died, and she had found a secret much darker than an affair. The memory just surfaced. 3 weeks before the funeral, Eleanor was still alive. 8 months pregnant, she stood in her bathroom and gazed into the mirror. Her face seemed drained of color, despite the glow everyone mentioned. Her eyes looked sunken, with dark shadows beneath them from sleepless nights. Her hands trembled on the marble counter as a sudden chill washed over her. "You foolish, foolish woman," she whispered to her own reflection. The warnings were everywhere. How could you have been so blind? A receipt from the Four Seasons Hotel lay on the counter. It showed a room for two, champagne, chocolate-covered strawberries, and breakfast, all on their shared credit card, which she rarely ever checked. He had not even bothered to conceal it. Eleanor lifted the receipt with unsteady fingers. She read it over. The date was November 15th. The room was the presidential suite. The total came to $3,400 for one night. Their anniversary getaway to her parents' lake house was canceled that very week. Marcus had told her there was a business emergency. He said something about a major deal collapsing. He swore he would make it up to her. Now, she understood how he actually spent his time. She folded the receipt with great care and tucked it into her pocket. She knew she would require evidence. She needed absolute proof. She had to gather every piece of information before deciding on her next move. She looked at her reflection once more, at the woman who accepted every lie and trusted every word. Her entire life had been built on a foundation of deceit. "Not again," she said softly to the stranger in the mirror. "Never again." Back at the funeral, the service was coming to a close. Marcus rested his hand on Eleanor's casket with a look of feigned tenderness. His wedding band glistened in the light. He lowered his head as if in prayer, but his mind was likely on other things. Behind him, Gregory Morrison subtly checked his watch. Gregory was 58 and had been the Hartwell family lawyer for 30 years. He had prepared Richard's first business deals when the company was just an idea. He set up the trust that shielded the family's money from opportunists. He helped Eleanor draft her first will at 21 when she received her inheritance. And just 3 weeks ago, he helped her write her final will in complete secrecy, with instructions that would destroy everything Marcus Bennett thought he had secured. The will was to be read in 2 hours at the Hartwell estate, but Gregory held a secret. Eleanor Hartwell was about to have the final say from beyond the grave. When she did, nothing would ever be the same again. 6 weeks before she passed away, Eleanor Hartwell's day started like any other Tuesday in October. She woke up at 7:15 in an empty bed. The sheets next to her were cool, which meant Marcus had been gone for hours. He had sent a text at 5:30 about a meeting in the city, saying he did not want to disturb her and that he loved her. She had smiled then, but now she questioned if any of it was real. Eleanor made tea in the perfect kitchen of their $5 million suburban home. She drank decaffeinated Earl Grey, as her pregnancy book advised against caffeine. She stirred in honey from the local market, a sweet treat Marcus always kept in stock for her. She had toast with butter and jam. While eating, she browsed news on her tablet, stopping to read a story about a mother and daughter who were reunited after 40 years. She found herself crying more easily lately, which the doctor blamed on hormones. She felt the baby kick her hand and she smiled. "Good morning, my sweet baby," she whispered to her belly. "I guess you are hungry, too." By 9 o'clock, Eleanor felt antsy. The house was far too silent. The cleaning service was not due until Thursday. Her mother wanted to visit, but Eleanor said she needed to rest alone. She paced through the house, needing something to keep her busy. The nursery was complete. The thank you cards for the baby shower were all sent. The hospital bag was packed and ready by the door. For the first time in what felt like forever, Eleanor had absolutely nothing to do. It was then that she made the choice to tidy up Marcus's home office. This was not a task she usually took on. Marcus was very protective of his workspace. He always kept the door shut while he was working. He had politely asked her not to touch his files because his system was very specific. But Eleanor was in a nesting phase. Her doctor said that pregnant women often get the urge to clean and organize. It was a natural instinct to prepare for the baby. She thought Marcus would be understanding. He always was. She began with his bookshelves, dusting old leather books that Marcus owned but had never opened. She now saw they were just for appearances, part of the successful businessman role he performed. Next was the filing cabinet. It had color-coded folders in alphabetical order. Tax documents, investment papers, and property deeds were all in perfect order. Then she moved to his desk. It was a huge mahogany antique, which supposedly belonged to a wealthy historical figure. Marcus spent $60,000 on it at an auction. Eleanor felt it was too much, but Marcus called it an investment. She polished the top with a soft cloth, arranged the pens, and adjusted the silver photo from their wedding day. That is when she saw the small drawer on the left side, tucked between two larger ones. She's seen it countless times, but never really noticed it before. It was just a simple drawer. But when she pulled on the handle, it was locked tight. Eleanor just stared at the locked drawer. A strange cold feeling began to grow in the pit of her stomach. Why would Marcus need to lock a drawer in his own home? She tried to ignore the feeling. People are allowed to have their secrets. Everyone has a right to their own private space. She thought she was being paranoid, blaming her pregnancy hormones for making her suspicious. But the uneasy feeling just would not leave. She began searching for a key. She checked the desk and all the other unlocked drawers, which held nothing unusual. She looked on the bookshelf and in the pocket of a jacket hanging nearby. There was nothing. She went up to their bedroom and checked his bedside table and his dresser. His closet was perfectly organized by color and season. Inside his sock drawer, under a line of expensive cashmere socks, she discovered a small silver key. Her heart began to beat much faster, and she was not sure why. A small voice deep inside her was telling her to stop. It urged her to put the key back, shut the drawer, and forget she ever saw it. She returned to the office. The key slid into the lock and turned smoothly. The drawer opened. A phone was inside. It was a sleek, black, modern device. It was not the phone Marcus used every day. It was a secret second phone. Eleanor's hands shook as she lifted it. The screen lit up, requesting a passcode. She typed in his usual password, which was their anniversary's 0719-2019. Unlocked. The screen showed the usual applications, like messages, photos, and a calendar. She tapped on the messages. Hundreds of chats opened up, all with one person. The contact was named V, with a heart symbol next to it. Eleanor lowered herself to the floor of her husband's office, her pregnant belly making it difficult, and she started to read. The messages went back 2 years. 2 years filled with I love you and I miss you and I want to see you so badly. 2 years of I wish you were here with me and it will be soon, baby, and she has no idea. She saw 2 years of pictures she wished she could erase from her mind. Vanessa in her undergarments. Vanessa wearing nothing. Vanessa in a bed with the sheets wrapped around her flawless body. It was 2 years of planning and promises and love that was meant for somebody else. The affair began before she was pregnant, even before their anniversary trip to Paris, where Marcus had promised her his undying love. It was before he promised her a life full of joy. It was before he placed his hand on her stomach and said their child would be the most fortunate baby in the world. It was all a complete fabrication. Everything she had believed in was a lie. Eleanor remained on that cold floor for a long, long time. She did not weep. She did not yell. She did not smash the phone against the wall or leave the house. She did not call her mother or her closest friend. She was in too much shock for any of that. She did what any person might do when their entire life falls apart. She walked into the kitchen. She brewed some tea. She stood by the counter, watching the tea cool, just staring at the wall for 47 minutes. The clock on the wall kept ticking. The refrigerator made its low, steady hum. From somewhere outside, a dog was barking. Inside the quiet house, Eleanor Hartwell's marriage silently disintegrated. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she moved. She poured the cold tea into the sink, watching it disappear on the drain. She washed the cup, dried it, and placed it back in the cupboard. She returned to his office. The phone was still there, unlocked, displaying a picture of Vanessa's smile. Eleanor photographed every text, every picture, and every lie. She sent the files to a secret email address Marcus did not know she had. She then placed the phone back where she found it and locked the drawer, hiding the key again. For the next 2 weeks, Eleanor Hartwell transformed. She ordered copies of statements for all of their credit cards. They had joint accounts, personal accounts, and even business accounts. The statements came in plain mailers to a post office box under her old name. She examined every charge, every single line item. Hotel rooms, always expensive suites for two. The bills were from romantic restaurants she had never seen. He had spent hundreds on wine and thousands on jewelry. There were purchases from Tiffany and Cartier, but they were gifts she had never received on any birthday or anniversary. He had been spending money on another woman for 2 years, all while Eleanor thought their marriage was a happy one. Then, She got their phone records for the last 3 years. There were calls late at night to the same number. They talked at 2 or 3 in the morning while he was on so-called business trips. The calls lasted for hours while Eleanor was sleeping by herself. She made a new folder on her computer and named it Home Renovation Ideas. Inside, she saved all the proof. He had business trips that were really secret getaways. Late meetings were actually dinners for 2. He would leave at strange hours for made-up emergencies. He kissed her forehead every morning and told her that he loved her. Eleanor just smiled and nodded, feeling a piece of her die each time. Her mother called one afternoon as Eleanor sat looking at all the evidence. "Darling, how are you feeling, and how is my grandchild doing?" She was putting on an act, telling lies to cover up the ones she was told. "Perfect," she said, her voice sounding cheerful and strong. "Everything is just perfect, Mom." You sounded just pregnancy fatigue. "He does, Mom. He tells me every single day," Eleanor said, closing her eyes. 2 weeks later, Marcus said he wanted to host a dinner party. "These are important people," he told her. "They need to see I have a stable, happy home. Can you manage it?" Eleanor looked at her husband, this stranger. "Of course," she replied. "I will make sure it is all perfect." She spent 3 days getting ready. She planned the menu, the flowers, and the seating chart. The guests came at 7 on a Friday night. There were 12 people in total. Their wives wore designer dresses and expensive jewelry. Eleanor greeted them in a navy silk maternity dress that cost $1,800. She wore pearls from her grandmother and her 5-carat diamond wedding ring. The ring now felt heavy like a pair of handcuffs. She played the part of the perfect hostess. And then Vanessa Crane walked in. She moved with the poise of a woman who knows she is beautiful. Marcus moved to her side smoothly, placing his hand on her back. "Everyone, this is Vanessa Crane. She is our interior designer for the new office. Work is brilliant, absolutely brilliant." Eleanor reached out her hand, her smile fixed in place. "It is so lovely to meet you." Their eyes locked for a moment. She saw something in Vanessa's face. Was it guilt or victory? "The pleasure is all mine, Mrs. Bennett. Marcus talks about you all the time." "I am sure he does," Eleanor thought to herself. She imagined he told Vanessa their marriage was over and he was only staying because of the baby. Dinner was a slow and painful event. Eleanor played her role perfectly. She laughed at all the right times and asked all the right questions. She's sure everyone always had a full glass of wine. All the while, she watched Marcus and Vanessa across the table. They exchanged quick glances when they thought nobody was looking. Their fingers brushed against each other for just a second too long. They believed they were being careful, but Eleanor could now see everything with perfect clarity. In the middle of the main course, Eleanor excused herself. She went to the powder room, locked the door, and sat on the tub. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing was short and fast. The baby kicked as if it could feel her pain. She put a hand on her belly and counted. "It is okay," she whispered. "We are going to be okay. I promise you that." She was in the bathroom for 10 minutes, calming herself down. She fixed her makeup and smoothed out her dress. She looked in the mirror one last time. Perfect, calm, and unbreakable. Then she went back to the dinner table. Later that night, Eleanor could not sleep. Marcus was out again. He said it was for business drinks with an investor. She did not bother asking where he was going. She went back to his office, but the second phone was gone. He must have taken it. But she was not looking for the phone this time. The folder on her laptop was full of evidence, but it was not enough. Cheating was painful and humiliating, but it was not a crime. She needed something bigger. She searched his desk this time more thoroughly. She felt for hidden panels and false bottoms. That is when she found it. There was a second locked drawer hidden behind a panel she had not seen before. It took her 20 minutes to find the key. It was taped under a filing cabinet. Her heart was pounding as she unlocked the drawer. Her hands were shaking as she turned the key. Her whole world fell apart when she saw what was inside. It was a blue United States passport, but the name inside was not Marcus Bennett. It said Derek Sloan, and the picture was of her husband. There was also a death certificate for Marcus William Bennett, dated 8 years ago. The cause of death was listed as a hiking accident. Then there were photographs. 2 young men were smiling at the start of a trail. One was the man she knew as Marcus. The other was a stranger. There was also a handwritten letter. It read, "To whoever finds I know the truth." Derek Sloan killed Marcus Bennett on that hiking trip. He hid the body. He waited 2 years and then he stole Marcus's identity. He is a fraud, living someone else's life. Model, I have no way to prove it, but I know it is the truth. Someone has to stop him before he hurts another person. The note was not signed. Eleanor sat on her husband's office floor with the evidence all around her. She tried to understand what she was looking at. Her husband was not Marcus Bennett. His real name was Derek Sloan. And it looked like Derek Sloan murdered the real Marcus to steal his life. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling her daughter kick inside. Her baby knew nothing of the nightmare her mother just discovered. She was married to a fraud, a con artist, and maybe a killer. And she was pregnant with his child. The sun rose far too quickly. Eleanor did not sleep at all. She stayed in the office all night, reading the documents over and over, taking pictures of everything, and putting it all back exactly as she found it. She heard Marcus arrive home at 6:15. She heard his car in the garage, the engine cut off, and the door to the house open and close. She was already in her bed by then, lying perfectly still. Her eyes were closed and she breathed slowly and deeply. She was acting like a woman in a deep, peaceful sleep. She tracked his movements through the house by sound. She heard his keys land in the ceramic bowl near the door. She heard him pouring a glass of water in the kitchen. She heard his feet on the staircase. Then the shower turned on. She listened to the water run. She heard him humming a song she had never heard before. He seemed to be in a very good mood. Of course he was. He had just spent the entire night with his mistress, all while his pregnant wife was awake in the dark, learning her marriage was based on murder and lie. Eleanor counted every minute. She listened to him get dressed and heard his sock padding down the hall. She smelled his cologne as he walked into the bedroom. It was expensive and easy to recognize. He bent over and kissed her forehead with lips that had likely kissed another woman just hours ago. He whispered, "Love you, Ellie. Get some sleep. You really need it." Her entire body wanted to scream. Every single instinct told her to pull away and push him off. She wanted to demand he tell her the truth. But she did not move a muscle. She did not even flinch or show that she knew anything. "Love you too," she whispered back, pretending to be half asleep. She heard the smile in his voice as he walked away. She heard the front door open, then close and lock, then his car starting in the driveway. She only let herself take a real breath when the sound of the engine faded away.
Into the bathroom and got
sick, even though she had not eaten anything. She knelt on the cold tile, her head pressed to the toilet, and thought, "I am not going crazy. I know what I saw. He is not Marcus Bennett. He's a completely different person. And I am stuck in this house with him. I am carrying his child. I am 8 months pregnant, all alone, and married to a man who might have killed someone to take over their life. What am I supposed to do?" She spent the entire morning frozen with fear. Every little noise in the house made her flinch. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every car that passed by could be Marcus coming home when he was not supposed to. It could be Derek, coming to check on the wife who knew his secret. She knew she could not tell her parents. Her first thought was to call her father. She wanted Richard Hartwell to use his money and power to fix this, just like he fixed every other problem. But Derek would expect that. The second Richard's lawyers or security people got involved, Derek would know she had found out the truth. And what would he do then? Would he run away? Would he try to force her to go with him? Or would he decide she was too much of a risk to let her live? She could not call the police, at least not yet. She had some documents and a lot of suspicion, but no actual proof. She did not have the kind of evidence that would be strong enough for a court. She did not have proof that could send him to jail before he had a chance to hurt her. And then there was the prenup. That awful document she signed when she was 29 years old. She was so in love she never even read the details. If she left him, she would get nothing. If he left her, she would get nothing. The only way she could get to the Hartwell family money was if Marcus was found guilty of a crime, or if she died. If she died, the idea hit her like a rock dropped into a calm pond, creating ripples of fear. What if Derek had already thought about that? What if he was making a plan right now? She touched her belly and felt her daughter kick. "We are in danger," she whispered. Both of us are. By midday, Eleanor knew her next step. She grabbed her phone and dialed Sam. I need to see you, she said, getting straight to the point. Not at my house. We need to go somewhere we have never been before. Somewhere nobody would ever think to look for us. Sam could hear the change in her voice. It was full of fear, desperation, and a brokenness that was new. There is a coffee shop on Maple Street, Sam said. It is in an old Victorian building that used to be a bookstore. I can be there in 30 minutes. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Eleanor drove through the quiet suburban streets, constantly checking her mirrors. She was making sure no one was behind her. She took a longer route, circled back twice, and parked in a lot 3 blocks from the coffee shop. She thought she was being paranoid, but maybe she was just finally being careful. The coffee shop was small and the lights were dim. It smelled like old books mixed with fresh coffee. It was exactly the kind of place she would never go to. It was perfect. Sam was already inside, sitting at a table in the corner with her back against the wall. Her expression changed as soon as she saw Eleanor enter. Oh, my gosh, Ellie, what on earth happened to you? Eleanor sank into the chair, her large pregnant belly making it a tight fit. She looked at her best friend, the woman she had known for over 10 years. She was the only person in the entire world she could completely trust. I need you to listen, Eleanor said. I need you to listen to every single word I am about to say. And please do not say anything until I have finished. Sam gave a slow nod. Okay, I am listening. Eleanor told her everything. She told her about the affair, the secret second phone, the messages that went back 2 years, and the pictures she wished she could forget. Sam went from worried to angry to fiercely protective. Then Eleanor told her about the other things she found. The passport with the name Derek Sloan. The official death certificate for Marcus William Bennett. The photos of 2 men who went hiking together when only one of them returned. And the unsigned letter that accused Derek of murder. Sam turned from angry to horrified until she was as pale as a ghost. Ellie, she said after Eleanor finished, this is a crime. This is much more than an affair. This is identity theft. This is fraud. And this could be murder. We have to call the police immediately. Eleanor just shook her head. And tell them what? That my husband might be using a dead man's name? That I might be married to a murderer? They are going to want proof. Real proof. The kind of evidence that will work in a courtroom. And the second Derek finds I suspect him, the second he thinks I could expose him, I will be in danger. She put a protective hand on her belly. We will be in danger. Sam just stared at her friend. The seriousness of it all felt like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. Then we will get the proof, Sam finally said in a quiet, careful voice. We will do it without him finding out. That is what I was thinking. Do you have a plan? A small smile almost appeared on Eleanor's face. I am starting to form one. In the 2 weeks that followed, Eleanor Hartwell changed completely. She was not just a pregnant wife anymore, waiting at home for her husband. She became an investigator, a planner, and a woman fighting for her own life and the life of her unborn child. She hired a private investigator, paying only in cash. His name was Raymond Garrett, and he was highly recommended by a divorce lawyer Sam had contacted for her. Garrett was 55 years old, a former BFI agent with a weathered face, faint eyes that looked like they had seen it all. She always met him in a different place. They met in public parks, at shopping malls, and in the back of a diner 40 miles away from her home. She paid him from a secret bank account her father had created for her a long time ago. He used to call it her mad money for an emergency. She never truly understood what that meant until this moment. Garrett was fast and did not ask a lot of questions. In just 1 week, he had answers. The real Marcus William Bennett was from a very wealthy family in Greenwich, Connecticut. He came from old money and an important family. With degrees from top schools like Exeter and Yale, he had everything given to him his whole life. He had died 8 years ago during a hiking accident in the Rocky Mountains. He was supposedly on a solo trip. His body was never found. The search teams of Tuft after looking for 2 weeks. The mountains held on to their secrets. But Marcus was not hiking by himself. The person with him on that final trip was a man named Derek Sloan. Derek Sloan grew up in the foster care system in Ohio. He had no family, no money, and no future. He was moved between different group homes. He turned 18, was on his own. After that, his records were consistent. He was involved in small scams and minor theft. There was nothing violent, but also nothing honest. He ran into Marcus Bennett at a bar, Hope, Denver, just 2 months before the hiking trip. They became friends who went out drinking together. Marcus was drawn to Derek's rough personality, his street smarts, and his stories about a life so different from his own. Derek was drawn to Marcus's money. They went on a hiking trip together at the end of August. 2 men walked into the wilderness, but only one of them walked out. Derek claimed that Marcus slipped on a rocky path and fell into a deep canyon. He said he tried to rescue him but could not. The body was too far down to get. The park rangers believed his story. Why would they doubt it? He seemed upset and traumatized. He was just a man who had to watch his good friend die. The case was closed. 2 years after that, Marcus Bennett reappeared. He reached out to his mother, Virginia Bennett, with a wild story of survival. He claimed a head injury had stolen his memory. He had wandered for weeks, was found by a family in a secluded cabin, and spent 2 years slowly piecing his mind back together. The tale was absurd, unbelievable. It was the kind of thing you only see on television shows. But Virginia desperately wanted to believe her son had returned. He was her miracle. She refused to ask too many questions. She did not focus on the small changes in his looks or the shifts in his behavior. She just welcomed him home. She gave him complete access to his trust fund. And just like that, Derek Sloan became Marcus Bennett. Raymond Garrett faced Eleanor in a diner booth in Trenton. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said softly, "I am 90% sure your husband murdered Marcus Bennett on that trip. He hid the body down deep in the mountains where no one would ever find it. Then he waited 2 years for everything to settle down before stealing his identity." Eleanor nodded. A part of her had known it since she'd discovered the documents. "I need real DNA proof," she stated. "Something that cannot be argued. Something that will be accepted in court." Garrett wrote on a napkin and slid it to her. "Virginia Bennett, who was the real Marcus's mother, still lives in Greenwich. If you can get her to help and we get DNA from the man who says he is her son, we can compare it to an item from the real Marcus. We can prove they are not the same man." Eleanor glanced at the address and number. She felt her unborn daughter move inside her, thought of the man she married, and the life she built on a foundation of death and secrets. "I will make sure she cooperates," Eleanor said. That night, Eleanor sat alone in the nursery. She left the lights off. The darkness felt strangely comforting, like a place to hide while she decided her next move. The room was flawless. The walls were a soft pink like the inside of a seashell. The white furniture cost more than most people's cars. A mobile with butterflies that hung above the crib. She had hand-painted each one with colors she picked herself. She sat in the rocking chair that Derek had helped her put together. She rocked steadily back and forth. The chair made a gentle creaking noise with each movement, a rhythm like a soft heartbeat. She rested a hand on her belly. The baby kicked. "I will protect you," Eleanor whispered into the darkness. "It does not matter what it costs or what I must do. You will grow up safe and loved and free from all of this." She rocked and rocked, "Even if I must burn everything to the ground to make that happen." Outside, an owl hooted in the trees. The wind whispered through the leaves. The moon disappeared behind the clouds. Inside the house, Eleanor Hartwell made her plans, and the walls seemed to listen to her every word. The funeral had finished 3 hours earlier. 300 people had left Westbrook Memorial Chapel, many of them crying, all of them in disbelief. The story of Marcus Bennett arriving with his other woman would be the main topic of gossip for months. Now the mourners were at the Hartwell estate for the reception. It was a massive property in the hills above the city, bought by Richard Hartwell 20 years ago when his company hit the $100 million mark. It had white columns, perfect gardens, and green lawns that went on forever. It was the kind of home that suggested old money and quiet influence. The atmosphere inside the reception was filled with awkwardness. People gathered in small groups, talking quietly, stealing looks at Marcus as he passed. The catering staff offered trays of appetizers and champagne that it seemed no one wanted. Marcus moved among the guests like a man who was expert at tragedy. He took their condolences with perfect sadness. He cried at all the right times. He spoke about Eleanor with so much emotion that even the people who had seen the incident with the red dress were almost touched. Almost. Vanessa wore him in his car in the driveway, as he had told her. Marcus had promised it would just be a few hours. Then they would finally go away together and begin their new life. She trusted him. She always trusted him. In a study with wood walls at the rear of the house, Richard Hartwell stared out the window at nothing. He had not had anything to eat or drink, and had barely spoken to anyone since the funeral was over. His face was like a mask made of stone, showing none of the anger boiling inside him. His daughter was gone, his grandchild was gone, and the person responsible was eating appetizers in his own living room. Gregory Morrison appeared next to him, moving silently like a long-time servant and advisor. "Richard, it is time." Richard did not look away from the window. "You have it all. Everything Eleanor gathered, the video files, the audio files, the papers, the DNA results, it is all prepared. And Detective Holloway is waiting. She and 2 officers are at the service entrance. They will come in when I give the word." Richard gave one quick nod. It was a sharp military gesture from a man who was used to giving commands and being followed. "Then let us finally stop this performance." The family came together in Richard's private library. It was a room created to intimidate. It had dark wood walls that seemed to absorb all sound and light. The leather chairs cost more than what most people earn in a year. First edition books filled the shelves. Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Faulkner, worth a great deal of money if someone had them valued. A large fireplace took up one wall, cold even though it was chilly outside. Over it hung a portrait of Eleanor that was painted when she was 25, before Marcus, before the secrets, before everything fell apart. In the painting she was smiling. Her entire life was in front of her like a grand banquet. Richard sat in his usual spot at the head of the room, in a tall leather chair that looked like a throne. Catherine sat by his side, her hand reaching for his, holding it firmly. Jonathan stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed, his face a mask of anger. Gregory Morrison was at the antique desk in the corner, with folders and devices arranged in front of him like weapons ready for battle. And Marcus Bennett sat down in one of the guest chairs, feeling as confident as a man who thought he was about to get a fortune. He was very wrong. The library door opened one last time. Sam Rhodes walked in. Marcus's confident look faded. "What is she doing in here? This is a private family issue." Gregory did not raise his eyes from his documents. Mrs. Hartwell made a specific request for Ms. Rhodes to be here for this reading. She was very clear in her directions. Eleanor's friend has no right to be at a will reading. She is not a relative. She has no legal right to be here. Mrs. Hartwell thought differently. Gregory's tone was steady, almost uninterested. She left very clear instructions about who needed to be here. When her final wishes were to be read, Miss Rhodes was included on the list. "Do you want to see the paperwork?" Marcus's jaw became tight. His eyes moved to Richard, then to Jonathan, then to Sam, searching for support, but finding none. "Fine," he finally said. "Let us just finish this." Gregory cleared his throat.
Before I start the reading of Mrs. Hartwell's last will and testament, I've
to tell you that Mrs. Hartwell left very specific instructions on how this reading was to be done. She recorded several messages in the weeks before she passed. She insisted that they be played completely, without any breaks, before we talk about her estate. He took a small device from the desk, a digital recorder of the type used for legal statements. His finger paused just above the play button. "I have to warn you, the things you are about to hear could be very upsetting." Mrs. Hartwell was very careful in her preparations. He pressed play, and Eleanor Hartwell's voice filled the space. "Hello, everyone." Catherine gasped. The sound of her daughter's voice was so real, so clear, so alive, especially after having seen her coffin put into the ground just hours before. "If you are listening, listen to this. It means I am dead, and if I am dead, there are a few things that must be said. Things I was not able to say when I was alive. Things that have been troubling my heart for several weeks." A brief silence followed. The recording picked up her soft, even breathing. "Marcus, I need you to know something. I learned about Vanessa 6 weeks before I passed away." The entire room became silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to have stopped. "The affair, the secrets, the hotel rooms you booked on our shared credit card at the Four Seasons, and the Saint. Regis, and all those other hotels you believed I would never look into. The expensive jewelry you purchased for her at Tiffany's with money that belonged to both of us. I knew about every detail. Marcus shifted in his chair. It was the first sign of his perfect act cracking. Eleanor was not thinking clearly, he said in a hurry. The pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid.
She imagined conspiracies everywhere. She accused me of things I did not do.
I was not confused, the voice from the recorder said, as if it knew exactly what he would say. I was thinking more clearly than I have ever thought in my life. The proof has all been documented. It is impossible to deny. And while I was looking into your affair, Marcus, I found out something much, much worse. There was another pause. This one, which built up the tension like a great storyteller. I know your real name, Derek. The color drained away from our faces as if someone had pulled a plug. Richard leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. Catherine put both of her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and confusion. Jonathan moved from the fireplace, his body tense with anticipation. Sam studied Marcus, waiting for his composure to break. He watched for the monster to show itself from behind that perfect smile. The recording played on. I discovered the passport with the name Derek Sloan. I also found a death certificate for Marcus William Bennett. It was dated 8 years ago, a hiking accident in Colorado. The body was never recovered. I found pictures of 2 young men who hiked into the mountains together, but only one returned. Eleanor's voice was steady and controlled. She was a woman who had faced a terrible truth and made a choice. I am certain that you killed Marcus Bennett on that trip. You hid his body somewhere in those mountains so no one would ever find him. You waited 2 years and then you stole his identity. You have been living as Marcus Bennett ever since. You took his money, fooled his family, and married women who trusted you. Marcus shot up from his chair. The legs scraped loudly against the wood floor, making everyone jump. This is ridiculous. This is completely ridiculous. Someone faked these recordings. Someone wants to ruin my life. He grabbed for his phone. I am calling my attorney this instant. Please sit down, Mr. Bennett. Gregory Morrison's voice was sharp and cut through the tension. Or perhaps I should call you Mr. Sloan. I think that is the name on your birth certificate. 2 security guards appeared at the library door. They were large men wearing dark suits, the same guards from the funeral. They came inside and blocked the only way out. Marcus glanced at them, then at Richard, then at every face in the room. Each person's expression confirmed that his secret was out. He sat back down, but he was not ready to give up. Eleanor's recording started again. I took 3 weeks to collect all the proof, including photos, papers, and witness accounts. I hired a private detective, a retired FBI agent who is an expert at uncovering hidden truths. Then I called Virginia Bennett, the real Marcus's mother. Gregory pushed another button. A large screen lowered from the ceiling. It was hidden behind a wall panel Richard had put in for work meetings. A video started to play. Virginia Bennett's face filled the screen. She was 70 years old and still looked graceful. She wore a simple black dress that suggested a life of quiet wealth, but her hands were shaking and her eyes were swollen from crying. 3 months ago, Virginia began, her voice unsteady. A woman by the name of Eleanor Hartwell reached out to me. She shared things about my son, or the man I believed was my son. The things she said made me feel physically ill. The video showed Virginia in her living room, full of antique furniture and family pictures. She clutched a tissue, wiping her eyes. She requested my help to expose the truth. I refused to believe her at first. I just could not accept it. Marcus had returned. It was a miracle. After grieving for two years, after accepting he was gone, he was finally home with me. Virginia's voice broke with emotion. She took a moment to compose herself before she went on, but Eleanor was right. Something was never quite right. I noticed small things but told myself they were unimportant. He forgot our family's special recipes. He used the wrong name for our old family dog. He failed to recognize his best friend from childhood when we saw him at the country club. She breathed dingily. I decided to help her. I gathered DNA samples from the man who said he was my son. I used a coffee cup he drank from at home. I took a swab from his cheek, pretending to look at a scratch. I sent the samples to 3 separate labs to be absolutely certain. The video focused on Virginia's heartbroken expression. The results arrived 4 weeks ago. All 3 laboratories confirmed the same thing. The man I have called my son for the last 6 years is not Marcus William Bennett. He does not share any of Marcus's DNA. Not a single bit. She held up a photograph. 2 young men were in the picture, with their arms on each other's shoulders, both smiling for the camera. This is my true son, on the left, Marcus. He died on that mountain 8 years ago. The man who has been imitating him is a stranger, a monster. And I need everyone to know what he has done. The video clip finished. The screen in the library turned black. The room was completely silent for a long moment. Marcus Bennett, who was not Marcus Bennett, was frozen in the chair. His expression shifted from confident to panicked, and then finally to something that was nearly defeat. Nearly. This is a frame-up, he said at last. His voice was different now, harsher. The polished accent was gone, replaced by a flatter, more common sound. Someone tampered with those DNA tests. They are trying to set me up. Virginia was never fond of me. She likely paid someone to fake the results. 3 different labs? Gregory asked calmly, with a clear chain of custody and expert witnesses who are ready to speak in court. That is a very elaborate conspiracy, Mr. Sloan. And stop using that name. My name is Marcus Bennett. I am Marcus Bennett. Richard Hartwell finally spoke. For the first time since the tape began, my daughter was aware. His voice was soft, but filled with a frightening coldness. She knew her husband was a killer. She knew she was pregnant with the child of a man who murdered someone and then stole his life. And there was no way out for her. His hands were trembling, just as Eleanor S. had when she learned the horrible truth. The father and daughter were linked by these same terror. But she found a different solution. Eleanor S.'s voice played again. I am sure you are all asking why I did not simply pack a bag, why I did not just escape in the dead of night, why I did not grab what little cash I had and just vanish. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. I was 8 months pregnant with your child, Derek, and you had trapped me completely. The pre-nuptial agreement I signed when I was young, foolish, and in love made sure of it. If I left you, I would get nothing. No cash, no support, no way to care for myself or for my baby daughter. Her voice became firm. But I did have control over one thing. Something that you could never get to. My will. The Hartwell Family Trust was set up by my father when I was a baby. No spouse can ever touch it. It can only be passed down through blood and given out based on my last requests. A moment of silence. So, let me be very clear about what you will receive, Derek Sloan. Another silence. Absolutely nothing. Gregory Morrison opened up a leather portfolio that was on the desk. His actions were slow and careful. Each movement increased the suspense in the room, like a conductor building to a musical finale. The final will and testament of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell reads as follows. Marcus sat like a statue in his chair. The handsome, grieving husband act had completely disappeared. Now something much colder and more calculating sat there, a trapped animal looking for any way out. To my husband, the man who is now known as Marcus Bennett, I leave him these things. Gregory paused, drawing out the suspense. $1, a symbolic payment for each lie he told me while we were married. A strange noise escaped from Marcus's throat. It was not quite a laugh, and not quite a cry of pain. My entire personal fortune, which is worth $120 million, will be put into a charity called the Eleanor Hartwell Foundation. The purpose of the foundation will be to help people who are victims of domestic fraud and deception. It will offer legal help, money, and therapy services. Gregory then looked at Paige. My shares of Hartwell Properties, which make up 30% of the company and are worth $280 million, will go straight to my father, Richard Edward Hartwell, to be managed in a trust. If my baby survives me, the shares will go to her when she turns 21. If my baby does not survive, the shares will stay with my father's estate forever. Marcus finally spoke up. His voice was sharp now, without the sophisticated tone he had used for years. The baby, our baby, I am her father. I have a legal claim to my child's inheritance. You are not allowed to exclude me completely. Are you sure? Eleanor's voice interrupted. A new recording started at the perfect moment. I had another DNA test performed, Derek. It was one you were not aware of. The room was silent once more. When I was 6 months pregnant, I said I needed a routine amniocentesis. You did not go with me to the doctor. You claimed you had important meetings. You claimed you trusted the doctors. You claimed I would be just fine by myself. The expression on Marcus' face shifted. The anger was replaced by a look of careful thought. But I was not just testing for health problems. That was not the main reason for the test. I was confirming who the father was. A short pause. You can imagine how I felt when I learned that I was always loyal to you during our marriage. The baby is definitely yours. 100% Derek Sloan, DNA. But the test also uncovered something else. The sound of rustling papers was heard on the recording. Your DNA was run through the National Criminal Database. This is a normal part of the process now in some states for this kind of test. It has to do with identifying genetic illnesses. I do not get all the science behind it, but the discovery was quite revealing. Marcus seemed to stop breathing. There was a positive match. Your DNA was a match to evidence from an armed robbery in Henderson, Nevada, 12 years ago. The robbery resulted in the death of a security guard whose name was Thomas Whitmore. The library was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. You were never charged because none of the witnesses survived. There was no DNA to compare it to in the system because you had never been arrested for a crime that needed a DNA sample until this test. Catherine Hartwell put her hand over her mouth. It was the same thing Eleanor had done when she first learned the truth. A mother and daughter separated by death, but joined by the same terrible discovery. Gregory Morrison shut the folder. All of Mrs. Hartwell's document, which includes the DNA proof from the prenatal test, have been sent to the district attorney's office in Nevada. The case is active again, and a warrant has been issued. Marcus shot to his feet. This is entrapment. It is illegal. My lawyers will tear this apart. You are not allowed to use medical tests as evidence. This will never stand up in court. Perhaps, Gregory said calmly, that is for the courts to decide. But I suspect the Nevada prosecutors have other evidence now that they know where to look. 12 years is a long time, but forensic science has advanced a lot. He glanced at his watch. However, the Nevada charges are not your biggest problem right now. The library doors swung open. A woman walked in. She was middle-aged and professional, with a badge on her hip. Detective Patricia Holloway, she said. Homicide Division. Marcus whirled around to face her. Homicide?
My wife died in a car crash.
The official report called it brake failure from normal use. There is no murder investigation. Was it an accident? Detective Holloway asked gently. She held up a large brown envelope. 3 weeks ago, this packaged in my mail. It was postmarked the day before Mrs. Hartwell passed away. Inside, there was a letter and some evidence. She opened the envelope and took out a few sheets of paper. Mrs. Hartwell wrote that if anything were to happen to her, I should investigate her husband right away. She thought someone had messed with her brake lines. She had overheard him on the phone, talking about car trouble that would seem like an accident. The room became completely silent. We had not inspected the wreckage very closely. Why would we have? It seemed like a typical accident. Worn-out brake lines on a mountain road. It was tragic, but not suspicious. She looked directly at Marcus. We examined it yesterday. The brake lines were cut. It was done by a professional to look like slow wear over time. If we had not known exactly what we were searching for, we would have never seen it. Richard Hartwell's hands started to tremble. It was the same shaking that Eleanor must have felt when she wrote that letter, when she knew she might die, but kept on planning. You murdered her, Richard said. His voice was just a faint whisper. You killed my daughter, and you killed my grandchild. Marcus started backing toward the door. His eyes scanned the room, searching for an escape he could not find. You have no proof. This is all circumstantial evidence. Any decent lawyer will tear your case apart. That may be, Detective Holloway agreed. But we have enough to arrest you. And once we begin to dig, Mr. Sloan, we usually find more. We will check bank records and phone records and find who you paid to cut those brakes. She nodded to the security guards by the door. Sloan. Derek Sloan, you are under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Hartwell. You are also being arrested for the suspected murder of Marcus William Bennett. And there is a warrant for you in Nevada for armed robbery that resulted in a death. The list went on as handcuffs clicked shut on his wrists. Identity fraud, financial fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The crimes of his life were all catching up to him at once. Marcus struggled. He fought against the guards and pulled on the cuffs, growling like a cornered animal. Do you really think you have won? He stared at Richard, then at Catherine, and at Sam, who was standing quietly by the window. Eleanor was a fool. She could have had it all. All she needed to do was just look away. All she needed to do was be a proper wife. Richard Hartwell walked forward until he was face to face with the man who killed his daughter. My daughter was far braver than you could ever imagine. She understood she might not survive you. She knew you could kill her before she could ever expose you. And she decided to spend her last weeks ensuring that if she died, you would not get away with it. The guards started to pull Marcus toward the door. "This is not finished," he screamed. "My lawyers will get me out by tomorrow morning. I will sue every single one of you. I am going to destroy your family. I will burn everything you have ever built to the ground." Nobody answered him. The door shut behind him. The people in the room let out a collective breath, and Gregory Morrison prepared one last recording. "There is one final thing," he said softly. Eleanor left a personal message for her parents and for Ms. Rhodes. She requested that we play it after everything was done. He pressed the play button. Eleanor's voice filled the room, softer this time, almost calm. "Mom, Sam, if you can hear this, it means I am gone, and I am so sorry." Catherine started to weep, not softly, but with the raw, painful sobs of a mother who had lost her child. "I am sorry that I could not tell you what I was going through. I am sorry that I had to carry this alone. But there is something I need you to understand, of silence. I was not scared, not in the end. I had come to terms with could happen, and I had made my peace." Another pause, because I was certain that even if I did not make it, the truth would. The evidence would make it, and there would be justice. The recording went quiet for a second. When Eleanor's voice came back, it was filled with strength. "Do not mourn for the person I was. Do not remember me only in this tragedy. Remember me for this. I fought back in my own way, on my own terms. I resisted. The last words lingered in the room like a gift, and I won." Outside the Hartwell property, Vanessa Crane was waiting in Marcus's car. 2.5 hours had gone by. He told her 30 minutes, or an hour at the most. She looked at her phone for the 100th time. There were no messages, no calls, and no reason for the long wait. The red dress she was wearing now felt strange and somehow wrong. When Marcus told her to wear it, she had felt so powerful and victorious. She was the other woman, finally stepping out of the shadows. Now she only felt chilled. She knew wearing red to a funeral service was not right. She knew what others would say. But Marcus had insisted. He wanted everyone to see them as a couple. He wanted Eleanor's family to know their marriage was over long before the crash. He wanted to make them suffer. She understood now that he wanted to twist the knife, and she had allowed him to use her to do it. She saw movement at the main entrance. Police cars were driving up the long road. There were 3 of them. Their flashing blue and red lights reflected off the neat hedges. Her heart started to beat faster. She saw the officers get out of their cars, saw them go into the house, and watched the minutes pass on the car's clock. Then, the front doors opened once more. They were dragging someone out. It was a man in a black suit, fighting against them, yelling words she could not make out through the car's windows. Marcus. No, that was not his name. She remembered the name the woman in the recording had used. She had heard that voice through the ballroom speakers, where she had snuck inside to listen. Derek. She watched them push him into the back of a police car. She saw his face twist in anger as he struggled with the handcuffs. He glanced her way once, and their eyes met through the window. His look was not one of fear or sadness or love or regret, or any of the feelings she would have expected from a man she had been with for 2 years. It was just hate. It was pure, burning hatred. It was as if she was the one who betrayed him, as if this was her fault somehow. The police car drove away. The other police cars followed it. Vanessa just sat in the empty driveway, with her hands trembling on the steering wheel. A security guard came to her window and tapped twice on the glass with his knuckle. She lowered the window. "Miss Crane." His voice was professional, but it was cold. "You need to leave the property immediately." "What is going on? Where are they taking him?" "Your boyfriend was just arrested for multiple counts of murder and other charges." Murder. The word felt like a punch. "I do not understand."
Eleanor died in an auto accident. It was in every news report. The brake lines were cut on purpose. Vanessa felt all the color drain from her face. "And if I were in your shoes," the guard went on, "I would get a good criminal defense lawyer."
A very good one. Why? What are you talking about? I have not done anything. He looked at her with an expression that might have been pity. Mrs. Hartwell left behind documents that suggest you knew Mr. Sloane's real identity, that you were aware he was not really Marcus Bennett, and that you assisted him in keeping his cover when people started asking questions. That is not true. I had no idea about any of that, did you not? The guard just shrugged. Well, that is for the district attorney to figure out. But being an accessory to murder is a very serious crime. If I was you, I would start calling lawyers now. He turned and walked off, leaving her by herself in the car. Vanessa sat there for a very long while, unable to move, unable to think. She just stared at nothing as her entire life fell apart around her. This was the same shock that Eleanor must have felt 6 weeks ago when she found out about her husband's lies, the same frozen terror. But Eleanor had fought through it. She had turned her pain into a plan. Vanessa did not know if she had that kind of strength. Inside the house, Sam Rose finally let herself fall apart. She had stayed strong through the funeral service, keeping her composure for Eleanor's parents. She stayed strong through the reading of the will, because it was what Eleanor had wanted her to do. She even held it together during the arrest, watching that monster get dragged away in handcuffs. But now, it was finally done. The rush of adrenaline was gone. Her defenses came down, and the heavy weight she had been carrying for 3 weeks came crashing down on her. Catherine Hartwell put her arms around her. This woman, who had just lost her own daughter and grandchild, was somehow finding the strength to comfort another person's pain. You knew, Catherine whispered, her voice choked with tears. You carried this heavy secret by yourself this whole time. Sam nodded, her whole body shaking with sobs. She made me promise her. She told me that if she died, I had to be quiet until the will was read. She planned every detail perfectly. She did not want anyone getting in the way, or tipping him off before her trap was set. How long did you know? For 3 weeks. She told me everything just 3 weeks before she died. The affair, the stolen identity, and the murder up in the mountains, all of it. Catherine imagined her daughter, 8 months pregnant, carrying that terrible secret alone. Why did she not tell us? We would have helped. We could have kept her safe. She was afraid for you. She believed if you confronted Derek, if you used Richard's power against him, he would find out. Then she would be in danger. You would be in danger. Sam pulled away, wiping her face. Eleanor was trapped. The prenuptial agreement meant she would leave with nothing. And she knew if Derek suspected her, he would silence her before she could tell anyone. So she planned for her own death. Yes, Sam's voice cracked. In her last 3 weeks, she made certain that the truth would come out. She made sure the evidence would be found and that justice would be served. She took a worn, creased envelope from her purse. She gave this to me the day before she died. She made me promise not to open it unless she was gone. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's beautiful, familiar handwriting. Sam, the letter started, "If you are reading this, then I did not survive. I need you to know that you were the best friend a person could ever have. You never made me feel bad for staying with him. You never told me to leave before I was ready. You just accepted me as I was, even when I refused to see the truth. Please take care of my parents. They will need your help. My father will bury himself in his work to avoid his sadness. Please do not let him hide away. My mother will say it is her fault for not noticing the signs. Tell her she is not to blame. Tell her I forgive her for any mistakes she thinks she made. And if my daughter survives, tell her who her real mother was. Not a victim, but a fighter. Someone who took on a monster and won, even if she did not get to see it. All my love, forever and always. Ellie." Sam held the letter close to her heart, crying and laughing. She had planned it all, even her final words. The next few days went by in a flash. Derek Sloane was not granted bail. The judge gave several reasons. He was a flight risk due to his history of identity fraud. He was a danger to the public because of the murder charges. He had no real ties to the area because his life there was a complete lie. He was sent to the county jail to await his trial. His lawyer filed motions, but they were all denied. His request to call character witnesses was rejected as they all knew him as Marcus Bennett and wanted him gone. Vanessa Crane was arrested 4 days later. The police arrived at her apartment at 6 in the morning. They found her packing a bag for a trip to Canada. She was charged with obstruction of justice, accessory to fraud, and possibly accessory to murder. She cried at the police station. She swore she knew nothing about the identity theft or the murder. She claimed she was also a victim. The prosecutors did not buy her story. Eleanor's evidence was very detailed. There were text messages between Derek and Vanessa using his real name. They discussed how to maintain his cover story. One message was terrible, with Vanessa promising him that nobody would ever discover the truth. She had known enough. Virginia Bennett, the mother of the real Marcus, held a press conference at the courthouse. She was dressed perfectly in black, with her silver hair neatly styled. She stood tall, this being 70 years old. Behind her were many family pictures. The photos showed the real Marcus at different ages, smiling. "My son died 8 years ago," she said, her voice strong even as tears fell. "He was killed by a man who stole his life. That man married a wonderful woman named Eleanor Hartwell. And when she learned the truth, he warned her, too." She held up a photo of Eleanor. She was young, beautiful, and vibrant. This was so brave. "She called me when she learned about the lie. She asked me to help her prove the truth, and she died to make sure that truth was heard." For the first time, Virginia's voice shook. "My son Marcus was kind and generous. He was the best of his father and me. He deserved more than having his life stolen by a monster." She stood up straight. Eleanor Hartwell deserved more than to be married to that monster and killed for trying to leave. She looked straight at the cameras. "I will spend the rest of my life telling their stories, making sure the world remembers them, and making sure justice is done." The story became a national sensation overnight. The news covered it constantly.
The man with two names, the pregnant wife who investigated her own husband, the will reading that caught a killer.
True Crime Podcast made special episodes to cover all the details. Documentary producers started making offers. Publishers offered million-dollar deals for the exclusive story. It was called the crime of the decade. Richard Hartwell paid no attention to any of it. He stood in his daughter's empty bedroom, surrounded by things she would never use again. Her books, her pictures, and the college degree she had proudly framed. Catherine found him there at midnight. He was on Eleanor's bed, holding a stuffed elephant from her childhood. "I always used to protect her," Richard said. "When she was small, I could fix anything. A cut on her knee, a broken toy, or a mean child at school. I always had the power to make it better." Catherine sat next to him and held his hand. "This was not something you could fix. No one could fix this. I should have seen what was happening. I should have known something was wrong with him. I brought him into our family. I gave my daughter to him. We all did. We were all tricked." Richard looked at the wedding photo on her nightstand. She was glowing in her white dress, next to Marcus and his charming smile. "She knew," he said. "In the end, she knew what he was, but she could not get away." Closed his eyes, but she still won. Even after she was gone, she found a way to ruin him. He looked at the elephant, remembering he bought it for her 5th birthday. "She used to carry it everywhere. That is the daughter I knew. That is the one I will remember." He stood up slowly, his body aching from sitting so long. "Let us go to bed, Catherine. Tomorrow, we will start the foundation." The night before she died, Eleanor Hartwell sat and wrote 3 letters, one for her parents, one for Sam, and one for herself. The letter to herself was short, written on the fancy paper her mother loved. "You did everything you could. You protected everyone you could. And if this is the end, it is the one you chose. It is yours, not his." She sealed the envelope, wrote her name on it, and hid it in a drawer to be found later. It was 3:17 in the morning. Marcus was asleep upstairs. He was tired from whatever he did until 2 o'clock, probably with Vanessa. Eleanor did not care about that anymore. The affair was his smallest crime. She sat alone in the dark kitchen, rubbing her belly, and felt her daughter move. The baby was restless. Maybe she could sense that something was wrong. People say babies are intuitive. At least, that is what the book said. Eleanor had already picked a name for her. In her mind, she called her Hope, not because she felt hopeful, but because she wanted her daughter to be a symbol of hope for herself and for all women in desperate situations. Hope that there is always a way to get out, even when you feel trapped. "I am sorry," she whispered to the baby inside her. "I am sorry that I cannot promise you will be safe. I am sorry I chose this man when I did not know who he was. I am sorry for what is about to happen." She sat in that kitchen for 47 minutes. Her cup of tea was cold again. She did not drink it. She just sat and felt her daughter move, trying to make peace with her plan. She thought about running. She could grab the little cash she had and just disappear. She could go to Canada or Mexico, a place where Derek could not find her, but he would find her. She knew that with total certainty. He had found Marcus Bennett in the Colorado wilderness and killed him. He would easily find a pregnant woman who was on the run. She thought about telling her father. Richard Hartwell, money and power, had solved all the other problems in her life. But Derek would see that coming. The minute lawyers or private investigators got involved, he would know. And then what would he do? He would run. Or, worse, he would decide Eleanor was too much of a risk to keep alive. There was no escape, not while she was alive. So, she made another plan. If I die, she thought, he dies too. She had considered every important detail. For 3 weeks, she constructed a case designed to outlive her. Evidence was hidden in several places, and letters were written for any situation. Recordings existed to tell the truth she might not survive to share. Detective Holloway was scheduled to get her package one day after she died. Gregory Morrison kept the will and the tapes secured in his safe. Sam was given the letter and the directions. Virginia Bennett held the DNA proof and the nerve to use it. Every component was in position. Each trap had been laid. The only question left was if she would survive to set it off herself, or if her death would let her careful plan speak for her. She visited the nursery one last time. Butterflies on the mobile spun gently in the warm air from the vent. They were pink, blue, yellow, and green. Each one was flawless. They all stood for a future that might not happen. Eleanor sat down in the rocking chair, letting the dim light surround her. "I love you," she quietly said to her daughter. "No matter what happens tomorrow, or the week after, or what happens to me, I love you. I will keep you safe even if I must do it from my grave." She read it gently, feeling her daughter move inside her, counting each kick like a small prayer. 1, 2, 3. "I am not scared," she said to herself, and realized it was the truth. "I have come to terms with what could occur, and I am at peace." 4, 5. Then there was a 6th. "I did all that I could do. I got ready for every possibility, and now I must believe it will be enough." 7. The following morning, Eleanor went to visit Sam. She picked up coffee from their usual spot and bought pastries from the shop on 3rd Street. She made the visit seem completely normal. Just 2 expectant mothers enjoying a bright October morning. But she also had the letter, the sealed envelope, and the directions on what to do if the very worst came to pass. "If something happens to me," she explained, pushing the envelope into Sam's hands, "please do not open this. Just keep it safe, and you will know when the right moment comes." Sam's face grew very pale. Her hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. "Ellie, what are you telling me? What is about to happen?" "Perhaps nothing. It is possible I am just overthinking, and everything will be okay. But you do not think that is true." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "I am certain Derek Sloan murdered someone to take over their life. I am certain he has been ready to do anything necessary to keep his secret safe. And I am certain that I am now a danger to that secret." She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling a hopeful kick. "I must be ready for the chance that he might try to remove that danger. Then you need to leave now. Come and live with me. We will find a way." "I cannot, because of the prenuptial agreement, the money, and the evidence I would leave if I tried to escape. He would track me down, Sam. He would find me, and things would be much worse than if I just stayed." "So what is the plan? You are simply going to let him murder you?" "No." Eleanor's voice was firm and resolute. "I'm going to ensure that if he does take my life, he will ruin his own in the act." They held each other for a very long time, much longer than they usually would. It was the kind of hug people give when they think it could be their last. "I love you," Eleanor said. "You are like the sister I never had. I love you too. Please be so careful." "I will." But the two of them understood that it might not make a difference. Later that day, Eleanor started her drive home. The roads twisted and turned, mountain roads that went through the hills between the city and the suburbs. They offered gorgeous views of valleys and woods, turning golden in the fall. She felt it. When the brakes were not right, they seemed softer and did not respond as quickly. Her heart began to beat faster. Her grip on the steering wheel became tighter. A sharp curve in the road was coming up. She pushed down harder on the brake. The car slowed down, but not nearly enough. Everything started to spin. She thought of her daughter, her parents, and Sam. She thought of Derek, and she prayed the trap she set would completely destroy him. Then came the crash, the feeling of pain, the sound of bending metal and breaking glass, and then only silence. The trial started 6 months after Eleanor had died. The case presented by the prosecution was impossible to deny. Eleanor's own recordings were confirmed by 3 separate forensic specialists. Virginia Bennett gave her testimony about the DNA evidence. Detective Holloway provided a clear account of how the brake lines had been cut. The defense attorneys attempted to describe Eleanor as unstable and paranoid. They said she was a pregnant woman made delusional by hormones and loneliness. The jury did not believe their story. They saw a woman who collected proof while fully aware she could be killed for it. A woman who planned for her own end with incredible care. A woman who stood up to a monster and would not let him get away with it. They saw a hero. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor began her final statement. Eleanor Hartwell could not get out of her marriage alive. The prenuptial agreement guaranteed that. The loneliness guaranteed that. The threat she lived with every single day guaranteed that. She stopped, allowing her words to sink in. But that did not make her helpless. She worked with the things she had, her mind, her money, her resolve, and she made certain that her truth would be heard, even after she was gone. The prosecutor raised a picture of Eleanor, the one from her office, where she was smiling at something out of view. This woman knew she could die, yet she used her last weeks to build a case that would ruin the man who murdered her. That is not paranoia.
That is not hormones. That is
courage. Straight at the jurors. Give Eleanor Hartwell the justice that she died to achieve. The jury discussed for 3 hours. Found him guilty of every charge. First-degree murder for Eleanor Hartwell. Second-degree murder for Marcus William Bennett. Armed robbery with a deadly outcome. Identity theft. Financial theft. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. The charges kept coming. The sentence was life in prison with no chance of parole and no hope for release. Derek Sloan was taken away wearing an orange jumpsuit and chains on his wrists and ankles. He did not look at anyone or say a word. The charming deceiver had no more lies to tell. Richard Hartwell spoke to the reporters on the steps of the courthouse. My daughter Eleanor was the most courageous person I have ever known. She stood up to a monster by herself. She recorded his crimes, knowing it could cost her her life, and she planned for justice to be served even after she was gone. His voice broke for a second. He took a breath to steady himself. This day is not a win. A win would mean having my daughter with me and having my granddaughter with me. What we have today is justice. It is cold, it is needed, but it is not nearly enough. He looked up at the sky as if he was talking to someone the news camera could not see. But this is what Eleanor fought to get, and I will honor her memory for the rest of my days. That evening, Sam sat by herself in her apartment watching the news reports. She saw the verdict, the sentence, and Richard's emotional statement. She heard the legal experts discuss what it all meant. She poured a glass of wine for herself. It was Eleanor's favorite, a French Burgundy that was too expensive for her, but she bought it anyway. She held her glass up toward the television, where a picture of Eleanor was on the screen. You did it, Ellie. You really did it. He will now spend the rest of his awful life locked away in a prison cell, all because of the case you put together. She took a long drink. I am so incredibly proud of you, and I miss you so much it feels like a piece of me is missing. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with her wine. But I will keep living, just like you wanted. I will look after your parents, manage your foundation, and share your story with anyone who will listen. She drank the whole glass and poured a new one. And one day, when the pain is not so strong, I will finally go to Italy like you always said I should. I will eat far too much pasta and drink far too much wine, and I will think of you every single day. She lifted the second glass. This is for you, Ellie, for the warrior, for the friend, for the very best person I ever knew. She kept drinking until the bottle was finished, and then she wept until she finally drifted off to sleep. 4 months after the guilty verdict, Vanessa Crane took a plea agreement. The prosecution gave her 2 options. She could face a trial and a possible 15 to 20 years in prison, or she could cooperate completely, testify against Derek in the Nevada robbery, and get a much shorter sentence. It was not much of a choice. She sat in a small conference room at the district attorney's office with her lawyer next to her, and she told them every single thing she knew. She explained how she met Derek at an art show opening about 3 years before. She described how he won her over with his charm, his money, and his constant attention. She told them how he said his marriage was finished, that Eleanor was cold, unfriendly, and selfish, that they were only staying married for public image, for their businesses, and for the family fortune. And she told them how she had trusted him. She believed every single word, every promise, and every lie. When did you first realize he was not Marcus Bennett? The prosecutor questioned. Vanessa looked down at the table, at her hands resting in her lap, at anything but the people who held her future. About 8 months ago, he became very drunk one evening. He started talking about growing up in Ohio, in foster care and group homes. I mentioned that I thought he was raised in Connecticut, and he just laughed. He said something like, "That was Marcus's life, not mine." Did you ask him to explain what he meant by that? I attempted to, but he fell asleep before he could say more. The next day, he claimed he could not remember any of it. When I asked him about it, he just said I must have heard him wrong. But you knew that was not true. No, I began to look closer, to see the small things that were not quite right. The way he would occasionally forget parts of his own supposed history. The way he would quickly change the conversation if his family was mentioned. Vanessa finally met the prosecutor's gaze, but I did not want to see the truth. I was in love with him. I believed he loved me back. I believed we had a future together. Her voice cracked. I was a complete fool. When were you absolutely sure? Roughly 2 months before Eleanor died. I found the passport that had his true name, Derek Sloan. And you did not report this?
No. Why?
Vanessa was quiet for a long time. I was already too involved. I had helped him uphold his false identity. I lied for him when his stories did not make sense. If I reported him, I would have had to explain my own role in it. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. And I still loved him, even knowing he was a fraud. Even knowing our whole relationship was a lie. I thought we could fix it together. Did you know he planned to kill Eleanor? Vanessa went completely pale. No, I swear to God, no. He told me he was planning to divorce her. He would wait until the baby was born, confirm he was the father, and then file the papers. He said his lawyers were working to break the prenup, but you knew something was not right. I knew he wanted her gone. I knew he resented her. I knew the baby was complicating his plans. She buried her face in her hands, but I did not think he would actually kill her. I did not believe he was capable of that. He had already murdered someone. Miss Crane, you knew about Marcus Bennett by then. I was not certain. I had suspicions, but I told myself there had to be another reason. She looked up, with tears streaming down her face. I lied to myself because the truth was just too awful to face. And because I did that, Eleanor Hartwell is dead. Vanessa received 3 years in a minimum security prison. With good behavior, she could be eligible for parole in 18 months. It was not justice, not in a real sense. Not for Eleanor or Marcus, or anyone except the woman who helped a murderer hide. But it was something. Sam visited her one time. She was not sure why she even went. Maybe it was curiosity, or just anger. It was some need to understand the woman who stood by Derek while Eleanor's life fell to pieces. Vanessa looked different in her orange jumpsuit. She seemed smaller, and somehow older. The glamour that had been so striking at the funeral had faded to something pale and weak. "Why did you come here?" Vanessa asked across the table. Sam thought about it for a moment.
Because Eleanor would have wanted to understand. She always tried to figure out why people did the things they did, even people who had hurt her.
Vanessa's eyes began to fill with tears. I loved him. I know that does not matter. I know it does not excuse a single thing, but I really did. I truly believed we were going to build a future together. He did not love anyone, Sam said quietly. He was not capable of it. You were just another pawn to him, another tool to be used and then thrown away. I understand that now. They sat in silence for a moment. The heaviness of everything that had happened settled over them. I am sorry, Vanessa finally said. I know it means nothing. I know it does not change what happened, but I am sorry for all of it. Sam stood up to leave. Eleanor believed in second chances. She believed that people could change, that they could grow and become better than they were. So maybe one day I will forgive you. She looked down at the woman in the orange uniform. But not today. She walked out of the room without looking back. The Eleanor Hartwell Foundation launched 8 months after the trial ended. Richard provided the initial money, $50 million from his personal accounts. Another $50 million came from pledges from business associates who wished to honor Eleanor's memory. The mission was straightforward: to help women who were trapped in fraudulent marriages, to provide the legal resources to untangle all the lies, to offer the financial support to help them rebuild their lives, to create a supportive network of survivors who could support one another through the hardest parts of starting over. Sam was named the executive director. She quit her job at the hospital the day after the verdict, moved into the city office Richard had bought, and threw herself into the work with a passion that was almost an obsession. It was the only way she knew how to process her grief. The very first grant went to a woman named Maria Gonzalez. She had been married for 15 years to a man she believed was a successful businessman. She had 2 children with him. Her entire life was built around him. Then she found out he was already married. He had been married the whole time. He had a whole other family in another state, and another wife who did not know Maria even existed. Everything she thought she knew was a complete lie. Maria used the foundation grant to hire a lawyer who specialized in complex divorce cases. She moved into an apartment she could afford on her own. She started therapy for herself and for her children. 3 months later, she sent Sam a letter. The money helped. Of course it did. But that was not the most important thing. The most important thing was knowing I was not alone, that someone out there believed me, that what happened to me was real and wrong and not my fault. Eleanor Hartwell saved my life, and I did not even know her. Sam framed that letter and hung it on her office wall. It was the first of what would eventually become hundreds. Richard threw himself into the foundation with the same drive he had used to build his business empire. He attended every single board meeting, reviewed every grant application himself, spoke at fundraisers and awareness events, and at legislative hearings, where he argued for better protections for victims of fraud. It did not bring Eleanor back. Nothing was able to do that. But it gave him something to do with the rage and grief that was threatening to consume him. It was something constructive, something meaningful. Eleanor did not want me to destroy myself. He told Catherine one evening as they sat in the garden she had loved so much. She did not want me to spend whatever time I have left just drowning in anger and sorrow. How do you know what she wanted? Because I knew her. Because she was my daughter. Because she spent her last weeks building something to help other people instead of sinking into her own tragedy. He reached over and took Catherine's hand. That is who Eleanor was. She was a builder, a helper, someone who saw a problem and tried to fix it, even when fixing it cost her everything. Catherine squeezed his fingers. Then we will keep building in her name for her memory. Yes, Richard said, that is exactly what we will do. 1 year after Eleanor Hartwell died, the foundation had awarded 212 grants. 212 women had discovered their marriages were built on fraud. 212 families had been shattered by deception. 212 new beginnings were made possible by Eleanor's legacy. The foundation had grown beyond anything Richard could have imagined. It had offices in 4 cities, a staff of 35 full-time employees, partnerships with law firms, counseling centers, and domestic violence organizations all across the country. They had a waiting list now with more applications than they could fund, even with Richard's continuing donations. Other philanthropists had begun to contribute, inspired by Eleanor's story and moved by the work being done in her name. The office itself was in a renovated building on the Hartwell estate, built where Eleanor's nursery had once been. Richard had insisted on it. He wanted the foundation to have roots in the same ground where his daughter had planned for her child's future. The pink walls were now gone. Place were floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light. The open floor plans encouraged collaboration. There was a garden courtyard where staff and clients could find moments of peace. Sat at her desk in the corner office. Eleanor's handwritten letter was framed on the wall beside her computer. It was a reminder of why she was here. A touchstone for when the work became too heavy. A young woman sat across from her. She was 29 years old, with 2 small children, and a husband who turned out to have another family she knew nothing about. Jennifer found out 3 months ago when her husband's other wife called her. The woman called and screamed at her and accused her of being a homewrecker. Jennifer had no idea the other woman even existed. Her entire life had collapsed in a single phone call. "I did not know," Jennifer said, her voice trembling. "For 6 long years, he told me he was traveling for his job. He said it was for business trips, conferences, and meetings with clients." Sam gently passed her a tissue, listening quietly. She had learned that a listening ear was often the greatest comfort she could provide. "When I finally found out the truth, I thought my world was ending. What I had missed, what clue had passed me by. How could I have been so foolish?" Sam slowly shook her head. "You were not foolish. You were trusting. He is the one who betrayed that trust. The failure is his, not yours. But how can I tell my children? How do I explain that their dad is not the man they admire? We have people who know exactly how to help with that. We have people who can help you find the right words. They can help your kids process what is happening in ways that are appropriate for their ages." Sam pushed a folder across the desk. "This is your grant approval. $30,000, which is enough for an apartment, a lawyer, and 6 months of therapy for you and your children." Jennifer stared at the folder like it was made of solid gold. "I do not know how to thank you. I do not know how if it is possible to thank you for this. You thank me by getting through this, by rebuilding your life, and by being the mother your children need you to be." Sam leaned forward. "And someday, when you are ready, when you are strong again, you help someone else. You pay it forward. That is how this works. That is what Eleanor wanted." An hour later, Jennifer left, clutching the folder to her chest, looking so much lighter when she arrived. Sam sat alone in her office for a long time afterward, looking at Eleanor's letter, thinking about all the women they had helped and all the women they still could not reach. "You are still saving people, Ellie," she whispered to the empty room. To this day, Richard Hartwell dedicated his mornings to the memorial garden. He designed it himself, using landscapers for the heavy lifting, but planting everything with his own 2 hands. He planted the roses Eleanor adored, and milkweed for the monarch butterflies she loved. A small fountain murmured softly in the middle. Its gentle sound was a shield against the city's distant hum. He came to this spot every day, no matter the weather. He would speak to Eleanor, telling her about their foundation and the women they were helping. Other times he would just sit, letting the waves of grief come. Catherine came with him on this day. She moved with more effort now. The last year had taken its toll. But she found the strength to walk to the garden and sit with her husband in their shared sadness. She mentioned the landscaper wanted to add more yellow roses, Eleanor's favorite. He said he would consider it. They sat peacefully, watching a butterfly dance on the flowers. "I can feel her in this place," Catherine said quietly. "Does that sound strange?" "I feel her near me when I am here." "I feel it as well," he replied. "Do you think it means something, or is it just wishful thinking?" Richard saw the butterfly rest on a milkweed leaf, its wings gently moving. "I believe Eleanor would say it makes no difference," he said. "If we feel her with us and that gives us peace, then it is real enough." Catherine took his hand. "I miss her terribly. I always wonder what she would be doing. The baby would be turning 1. She would be so tired, so happy, and complaining about no sleep. She would have been a wonderful mother." "She already was one," Richard corrected. "She protected her child with all she had, even when it cost her life." He gently squeezed his wife's hand. "That is our family's stubborn streak. She inherited it from both of us." They stayed there as the sun traveled across the sky. Butterflies fluttered by. The fountain provided its quiet melody. "I am going to write a journal," Richard finally said, "about Eleanor, who she was, and what she did, so her truth is never forgotten, so people know she was more than a character in a crime story." "That is a wonderful idea. They should know she was funny, that she always burned pancakes and just laughed, that she would cry during commercials and loved silly reality shows. She was human," Catherine added, "a beautifully complex and wonderful person." "Exactly," he said. "That is what I want to show. Not a perfect saint, but a real person, my daughter." That night, Richard sat at his desk with a new journal. He looked at the empty page for a while, searching for the right way to start. At last he began to write. My daughter Eleanor was not a hero. She would have hated being called one. She would have rolled her eyes, called me dramatic, and quickly changed the subject to make me laugh.
But she was incredibly brave.
More so than anyone I know. When she learned her husband was a monster, she did not break down. She did not give up. She refused to let fear control her. Instead, she made a plan. She gathered her evidence and prepared for the worst. She made sure that if she did not survive, the truth would. This is not the heroism you see in movies. There was no audience, no grand speeches, just a pregnant woman all alone in her house fighting for what was right. But this is the heroism that truly counts, the quiet, real kind. Eleanor showed me that justice is not what you receive. It is what you prevent and who you protect. She died saving people she never even knew. Women who would hear her story and realize they are not alone or helpless. That is her true legacy. That is what she left for us. Not vengeance, but rescue. Not rage, but action. She was not a victim, but a protector. That is the Eleanor Hartwell I will remember for the rest of my days. The anniversary of her passing arrived on a cloudy October Tuesday. A heavy gray sky covered the city. A light rain fell on and off, unable to decide if it was a storm or just mist. The air had the smell of damp leaves and the approaching winter. Sam drove to the cemetery by herself. She had told Richard and Catherine that she needed this moment alone, a personal ritual she was not yet willing to share. Eleanor's grave was on a hill that overlooked a little pond. The family had picked the spot because Eleanor would have wanted a beautiful, eternal view. The headstone was a simple gray granite. It had Eleanor's name, the dates of her brief life, and the words she had requested. She fought, she won. The grave was already adorned with flowers when Sam got there. The family had visited earlier, leaving roses, lilies, and a small plush butterfly for the baby that was never born. Sam added her own flowers. She placed down yellow daisies, which were Eleanor's favorite. Eleanor used to say they looked like tiny suns. Sam sat on the damp grass next to the headstone, not minding that her pants were getting wet. "Hi, Ellie," she whispered. "It's been a whole year." The rain pattered from the tree branches. The pond's surface rippled with the wind. They caught Vanessa. She was trying to flee to Canada, Sam said. "Did I tell you that?" "Probably not. It happened while you were, you know." She let out a small, dark laugh. Eleanor would have found it funny. "She is in a minimum security prison. 3 years for fraud. She'll likely be out in 18 months. Sam idly plucked a blade of grass. "I went to see her once. I am not sure why, maybe just curiosity. I wanted to see the face of someone who helps ruin another person's life." She paused for a moment. The most chilling part was how normal she seemed. Just an ordinary woman who made awful decisions. Not some cartoon villain, just someone who chose to believe lies because the truth was inconvenient. She stared at the name Eleanor etched into the gravestone. I often think about that. I think about how easy it is to just go along with things, how easy it is to ignore the things you desperately wish were not true. She took a faded envelope out of her coat pocket. The paper was soft from being held for months, waiting for this day. "You asked me to come read this after 1 year, so here I am." She unfolded the letter with great care, treating it like a fragile piece of history. Eleanor's elegant, looping handwriting filled the page, a style her grandmother had taught her. The letter began, "My dearest Sam, if you are reading this, then a year has gone by. 365 days since I last saw you, since I laughed at one of your terrible jokes, since I criticized your choice in men, since I was alive. I hope the worst of the pain has passed. I hope you are finding moments of happiness again, and I hope you have forgiven me for leaving you to handle all of this. But I need you to know something. On that final night, when I knew what was about to happen, I was not sad. I felt a strange sense of peace because I knew the plan was working. The evidence was safe. The recordings were made. Truth was going to be revealed. And I knew you would be there to see it through, to support my parents, to manage the foundation I dreamed of, to share my story. You were always my strength, Sam. The one who believed me when I was all alone. The one who helped me keep fighting when I felt like giving up. So now I have one last favor to ask of you. Live, not for yourself. Fall in love again. I know you think you are too old, which is silly. You are 33, not 90. Open up your heart to someone who is worthy of it. Take that vacation to Italy you always wanted. The one you delayed for work, for money, for all the reasons we use when we are scared to truly live. Eat all the pasta, drink good wine, stand before the statue of David and cry because it is beautiful and you are there to see it. Allow yourself to be happy. Please, I am begging you. Do not let Derek claim 2 lives. Do not let your grief be his last victory. I loved you. I love you now, and I will be watching you, probably judging your wine. Forever your friend, Ellie. Sam laughed as tears rolled down her cheeks. You are definitely judging my wine. I had a $15 bottle last week you would have tossed out the window. She folded the letter with great care and put it back in its envelope. By the way, I booked that Italy trip. I leave next month. Florence, Rome, and the Amalfi Coast. 3 weeks of just enjoying beautiful art and eating amazing food. She wiped her tears. And I have met someone. His name is David. He teaches high school history, which you would find hilarious since I almost failed that class in college. A small smile appeared on her face. He is kind and very patient. He makes me laugh. He knows everything about you and what happened, and he never tries to fix me or hurry my healing. He just lets me feel what I need to feel. I think you would really like him. I think he would get your approval. The rain finally stopped. A small patch of blue sky broke through the gray clouds. I am going to be happy again, Ellie. I can feel it starting. There are these little moments now, gaps between the sadness where I can actually feel joy. Sometimes it feels like a betrayal, like being happy means I am forgetting you, but I know that is not true. You wanted me to live a full life, not just exist. So, that is exactly what I am going to do. She got to her feet, brushing the wet grass from her pants. I will be back next year, and the year after that, until I am too old to make it up this hill. I will tell you all about Italy, about David, and about all the women our foundation is helping. Your story will be remembered as a victory, not a tragedy. Just then, a monarch butterfly, orange and black, floated past. It was strange to see as the migration season was long over. It landed upon Eleanor's headstone, its wings gently pulsing open and closed. It then soared toward the sun, breaking through the cloudy sky. Sam watched it fly away. Always the show-off, she whispered with a smile. You had to get the last word. She turned and headed for her car. The cemetery felt calm. The recent rain had washed everything clean. Behind her, flowers on Eleanor's grave danced in the wind. The headstone shined with moisture, and an unexplainable feeling lingered there, a presence that was watching, approving, and finally at rest. 3 years later, the Eleanor Hartwell Foundation was one of the nation's top organizations for victims' rights. It had given 1,200 grants, helped 4,000 women directly, and had active programs in 27 states providing aid. Her story was told again and again. Documentaries won awards, and books became bestsellers. A movie about her life earned 3 Academy Award nominations, including one for Best Picture. Eleanor Hartwell was now a symbol, an icon whose name stood for something. But for those who knew her, she was still just Ellie, who laughed too loud at her own jokes and burned the pancakes every Saturday morning. She could never pass a bookstore without buying a book she would probably never read. She was kind and complex and perfectly imperfect. She was a woman who found courage when it felt impossible. That fall, Richard and Catherine celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. They had a small party at their estate with family and close friends. The wine was good and the company was even better. They danced slowly in the garden Eleanor had cherished. They moved together as one, the way couples do after a lifetime together. She would have been 35 this year, Catherine said softly. I know. And the baby would be 3, talking in full sentences, always asking why. I know. Do you ever think about what their lives might have been? Richard held his wife closer. Every day, but I try not to live in that space. Eleanor would not want us stuck in what-ifs. She would want us living the life we have right now. She was always much better at being present than I was. She learned that from you, he said. Catherine laughed softly. I am not so sure about that. I am. Taught her to enjoy the small moments, the beautiful things, the quiet joy of a normal Tuesday when everything is just okay. That does sound like something she would say. It is. She told me so, years before everything happened. She said you taught her happiness is not a destination, but realizing you are already in it. Catherine wiped a tear from her eye. I miss her so much. I know. Me too. Every single day. They swayed under the autumn stars. Soft music drifted from hidden speakers. The butterflies were gone, but their flowers remained, waiting for spring. Sam stood at the garden's edge, watching them. Her own life had changed so much in 3 years. She had been to Italy twice, Paris once, and now had a city apartment that felt like home. David stood beside her, his hand holding hers. They were married now, after a small courthouse ceremony. Eleanor would have teased her for not having a big wedding, but she would have understood. Some moments do not need an audience. The foundation was in very good hands. Sam had stepped away from running the daily operations, letting her skilled team carry the mission forward. She still sat on the board and approved major grants, keeping Eleanor's vision strong, but she had learned to build a life outside of her work, just as Eleanor wanted. She was writing a book about Eleanor's story. The true story. The one that showed who she really was, not just what had been done to her. The publisher wanted to name it The Will. Sam was fighting for a simpler title, Ellie. Just her name for the woman behind the legend. The moon was full, making the flowers glow with a silver light. The fountain played its constant song. She stopped by a small plaque that Richard had placed there 3 years ago. It had only Eleanor's name and the foundation's butterfly logo. "Hey you," Sam said quietly. "It is late, I should go to bed." The leaves rustled in the wind. "I finished the draft of the book." Finally, she added, after 3 years of writing and crying. She sat on the bench by the plaque. "It is good. I think it is honest. It shows you as a real person, not a saint. The parts where you were scared and unsure and human." She looked at the sky. "David read it," he cried. "He said he feels like he knows you now, even though you never met." She paused for a moment. "I wish you could have met him. I wish you could have come for dinner to grill him and tell me everything I am too close to see. But I know you approve. I feel it." She took Eleanor's last letter from her pocket. The paper was worn soft from being read so many times. "I am happy, Ellie. I am truly deeply happy. The kind of happy you always wanted for me. It took a long time to hear. For years, I thought I would never feel this way again. The grief was so heavy it was hard to breathe. But I kept my promise. I lived. I fell in love. I ate the pasta and drank the wine, and I stood before the statue of David and cried." She smiled at the thought. "It was beautiful. You were right. You are always right." A breeze picked up, and the flowers danced. "I will never forget you. Never. You are a part of me. Part of everything I am." And then a single monarch butterfly appeared. It was impossibly late in the season. It should not have been there. It came to rest on Sam's shoulder. It stayed for a second, its wings moving slowly. Then it flew off toward the moon and the stars. Sam watched it fade into the night. "Show off," she whispered again. She stood and walked back to the house where David was waiting, and where the future Eleanor wanted for her was unfolding. Behind her, the garden was quiet. The fountain sang its song. The flowers dreamed of the spring, and Eleanor Hartwell's memory was alive. It lived on in the foundation with her name, in the lives she changed, and in the hearts of those who loved her. She was not a victim. She was a fighter, a guardian, a woman who won. The prison door had always been unlocked. She was just the first one brave enough to push it open. And now, 3 years later, thousands of other women had followed her through. That was her real legacy. Her gift was not justice or tragedy. It was freedom. This part of the story ends here, but it never truly stops, because right now another woman is discovering the truth. She is finding the secret bank accounts, the hidden phone, the second life her husband has been living. She feels that terrible, crushing weight of loneliness and fear, feeling completely trapped. But then she hears about Eleanor Hartwell. She reads the book. She watches the documentary. She finds out what is possible. She then realizes something that changes her world. She is not alone. She is not crazy. And she's not trapped. There is help. There are resources. There are others who have walked this same path and survived. She picks up the phone. She calls the foundation. She takes the first step on a journey back to herself. And somewhere, in some way, Eleanor smiles. Because this is what she truly wanted, not revenge or punishment, but rescue. One woman at a time, one story at a time, one brave step at a time. The foundation keeps growing. The work remains important. The legacy lives on. And the butterflies continue to visit the garden. Every spring, summer, and fall, they land on the flowers that Eleanor loved. They float on the air that she breathed. They carry a piece of her with her memory, her love, her hope. These are the things that cannot be destroyed, the things that make the fight worthwhile. This is not a goodbye. This is not an ending. This is a beginning. For every woman who reads this, sees herself in the story. For every survivor who needs to know that a better life is possible. For everyone who has ever felt trapped, alone, and powerless, you are not alone. You are seen. You are believed. You deserve to be rescued. And somewhere out there, Eleanor Hartwell is watching. She is cheering for you. She believes in you. Even though she never met you, she fought for you. She died for you. She made sure there would be help waiting for you. Because that is the person she was. A mother who never got to hold her child. A daughter who broke her parents' hearts with her loss. A friend who left letters to guide the ones she loved. A woman who refused to be silenced. A woman whose voice was heard from beyond the grave. A woman who won. And you can win too. The door is unlocked. It has always been unlocked. Push it open. Walk through. Live. That is the story of Eleanor Hartwell. A woman who took her darkest moment and made it her greatest victory. If this story touched your heart, if you felt it race with every revelation, if you were cheering for Eleanor, then I would like to ask a small favor. Please hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss another story just like this one. Model, please leave a comment and tell me which part of this story touched you the most. Was it the red dress she wore to the funeral, the big DNA secret, or Eleanor's last words to her friend? I truly read every single comment, and I value your thoughts. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Perhaps a friend facing a tough time, or someone who needs to know that you can always find the strength to stand up for yourself. And if you enjoyed this story, please give the video a thumbs up. It really helps more people discover these stories, and it tells me to create more for you. I am so grateful you stayed with me until the very end. Your support is so important. Till next time, always remember that the truth has a way of coming into the light. Always.